a lot of businesses are now expecting their resources to work remotely. So where before you could kind of define that people would work in an office, now that's becoming less and less likely. And so the way we're doing business has changed. Conventional security has really changed dramatically because we have a lot more remote users. And also what's happening because of the increase in breaches, there's a lot more compliance around what happens when there are technological breaches. And if for some reason you are your information is captured by someone outside your organization, there are increasing costs and fines for those problems. So it's critical at the moment that we start keeping up with those different cloud technologies and making sure they are secure. This slide here really gives you an understanding of the complexity that you have to deal with. So you've got cloud services, you've got devices that are owned by users, devices that are owned by the users themselves. You've got customers accessing your data, you've got multiple different identities, you've got partners, you've got home offices. There's on-premise information, personal devices, remote employees. So the complexity to you as a business owner or someone who's managing the data for a new business or a supplier is getting increasingly difficult. What we're going to show you today, hopefully, will let you see that services provided by Microsoft 365 bring a lot of that together into one place. And the way we start is with something called a zero trust policy. So where before you may have implicitly trusted certain people or certain devices, things are changing now because we have no control over a lot of those devices and we have no control over where people are working. So we're moving now to a zero trust environment where it doesn't matter who you are. Even if you're an administrator, your identities are checked, your devices are checked, and there's no way to get to information without the required compliance and policies in place. So we really start with this concept of zero trust. And what that allows us to do is consider everyone to be very much the same, and we can apply policies across the board that define access to your data, your applications, your infrastructure, and your networks. And that's exactly what Microsoft 365 is allowing us to do. What Microsoft Office 365 gives us is one unique solution. So there are multiple platforms that all sit across Office 365, and they're all controlled by what can be a singular authentication mechanism. So one user account per user allows them to access all of your data, all of your infrastructure, all of your services, all of your apps, which makes controlling those identities much easier because you know you've only got one per user. And what Office 365 is also doing is bringing sort of artificial intelligence, it's bringing machine learning, it's bringing automation into the picture. So for example, what conditional access will do within Office 365 is it'll check where users are logging in from. So if, for example, someone's working in Saudi and they're working in Saudi Arabia for 99% of the time, and then suddenly a user is seen to be logging in from, say, China, then conditional access will realize that there's something different going on here. And it'll also check to see where that user logged in last time. So if, for example, they logged in while they're in Saudi at 10 o'clock, and then suddenly they're logging in China when it's 10:30, there must be a problem. So the artificial intelligence and the machine learning and all the clever features within Office 365 detect these strange anomalies with logging in and help protect your data by then blocking that access request. So this entire infrastructure covers all of your, is integrated across all of your people, all of your devices, apps, and data. So from one console, we can manage all of these different things. And we've got the clever machine learning and artificial intelligence within Office 365 protecting our data. So Office 365 is integrated across people, devices, apps, and data. And it's also integrated across Microsoft 365, Azure, and on-premise applications as well. So it doesn't matter where your data is, there's a way of using Microsoft technologies to secure that data. And what is potentially a good thing to add on to the bottom here is we can also protect applications that are hosted by third parties as well, and potentially partners and your suppliers and also your customers, so that it is a complete homogeneous solution for security across all of your environment. And the way we split up the different parts of your environments to those is in this diagram here. So we look at identity and access management, we'll look at information protection, we'll look at cloud security, and also threat protection. So those are the four pillars that we look at when we're controlling access to information and securing information. And we're going to start with identity and access management. And this gives you a good understanding of the different security categories that Office 365 includes. There's a lot on here. We're not going to cover all of them. Some of them are not relevant really for the discussion today, but within Office 365, within Azure, within the whole Microsoft environment, the Microsoft ecosystem, we have something to control multiple different areas of your business and your technology. And you can see here the different areas that Microsoft is addressing to keep your information secure. Again, we're looking at identity and access management, we're looking at threat protection, we're looking at information protection, and we're looking at cloud security. So when we can understand where your threats are, where we can understand where your data is, where we can understand where your information is, we can put it in one of these categories and then provide the right security technologies to make sure that we keep your information secure. And so within identity and access management, these are the four different areas we're going to look at. And as I've mentioned, so with conditional access, which is part of Azure AD, we have multiple different ways of controlling access to your infrastructure, your apps and your data. And you'll know if you've looked at the Saudi Aramco requirements, a lot of the points on there are talking about something called multi-factor authentication. So what we can do with conditional access is we can generally allow people access to your data if where they're logging in from is consistent. If they're logging in from the same device, say they're logging in from the same browser or the same applications, that gives us something to understand about that user, and it becomes very consistent. We know what they're doing. And in those situations, we can apply some kind of trust to that configuration for them. But if something should change, say they go to a different device, they go to a different location, different application, then there is something changed there that conditional access will check. And so depending on that situation, we can either allow access, we can enforce multi-factor authentication, we can limit access to that user to only certain parts of your information, we can force a password reset, and we can monitor access. And all of this is within Microsoft 365. And it's useful to understand that once you have a Microsoft 365 subscription, it's very easy to then add this extra functionality. We can change a license for you, apply that license to a new user or a group of users, and then all these extra features become available. So if you consider that, let's say you wanted to achieve the same thing with multiple different vendors, each of those users would potentially need a different sign-in for all those different services. Whereas with Office 365, the user only has one identity to worry about, and we can provide the services based on that one identity. So if you look at the Saudi Aramco requirements and where you see points that talk about multi-factor authentication, Office 365 has that in there. And the easy way to look at this is that what you would have is a username and a password. And the way I like to explain this is that username and password defines someone's identity only. It's defining who you are. But what it doesn't do is provide you access to information. That's where the authentication comes in. So your username and password define who you are. And once you've done that, multi-factor authentication kicks in to then authenticate you. So where you have points in the the Saudi Aramco compliance requirements there that are talking about passwords and expiring passwords, we're putting an extra level of security on top of that by saying, yes, okay, you have a username and password, but that's not enough to access our information. We then need you to run through some multi-factor authentication checks to make sure that we can, before we give you access to our information. So a username and password is simply a proof of identity. It's not authentication. So what multi-factor authentication does is then it moves into other factors within Office 365. We can then start giving users passwordless authentication. We can provide single sign-on. So a user might sign into Office 365, but then also have access to third-party solutions. We can also give them access to application portals. And also what's very useful is that we can allow a user to self-service their own passwords and authentication. So once we've validated who they are, we can then start allowing them to reset passwords and manage who they are within the Office 365 ecosystem. So you can see within the environment here and the image on this slide, we can use single sign-on for multiple different third-party applications. So whether that's things like SAP, Cisco services, Zoho, for example, that we're using at the moment, multiple different third-party services will allow you to use Office 365 as a single sign-on service for accessing those different services. And here, just to reinforce that, we can see that Azure Active Directory is the core to the Office 365 ecosystem in terms of a user directory. Azure Active Directory sits there. It can manage, it can provide identities for on-prem environments. It can provide access to HR and user data. It can provide external identities for third parties and suppliers and customers. It can also supply access to software as a service applications, as you can see there, things like Salesforce, and also other cloud-hosted apps that come with other vendors such as AWS and Google Cloud, and also on-premise web applications too. So one of the features within Azure is something called the application proxy. So what that allows us to do is provide access to on-prem environments using Azure. So we start the Azure application proxy and we configure it in such a way that it allows access to on-prem environments, on-prem web applications. So a user would sign into Office 365 as usual, and then within their Office 365 portal, they would then have access to on-prem applications as well. And all of this is then secured using multi-factor authentication. For one, I have a security key. So yes, I can use the Microsoft Authenticator on my phone, but I also have a key I can plug into my laptop so that when I'm asked to authenticate, I just use my fingerprint on my secure key, and that also provides me access. So there's multiple different ways of authenticating users against Azure Active Directory, which then allows them access to multiple different applications. And as I've mentioned, what we have is this very nice life cycle and access governance. So we start with we can automate access to apps with provisioning. So we give users their application that allows them access to different applications. But then once we've given users their identities and we can force authentication, there's various things we can do with those accounts. So during the life of that account, we can provide access reviews. So let's say we have a team that we're using for discussions, which also provides access to our information. Periodically, we can have an access review. So we can check the members of a group to make sure that those users still require access to the information we've given them access to. So periodically, we can run access reviews just to make sure our information is secure. One thing we can also do is manage privileged access. So one of the features within Active Directory, within Office 365 and Azure, is something called privileged identity management. So what we can do periodically is force administrators to reactivate their privileges. So ordinarily what we would do, every user has a normal user account. And at this time, they can access all of the infrastructure that they need. So they can access their email, they can access SharePoint, they can access OneDrive. But if they want to start doing administrative tasks, then we ask them to elevate their permissions. So by default, a user is not an administrator. What we do is we ask them to go to privileged identity management, and we ask them to elevate their permissions for a period of time that allows them to perform their tasks. So what we're doing is working with the premise that people only have the access to things that they require at the time. And we work with the least, we give users the least privilege they need to do their work. So with privileged identity management, what we can do is ask users when they do need administrative privileges to go through a process to validate that request. And that request can be sent to another administrator within the organization just to say yes and approve that elevation in privileges. So where every user has one identity, the identity can go through a life cycle where we validate that they still need access, and also make sure that users only have access to the things they need, and they can elevate access to elevate their access to be an administrator and do administrative tasks when they need it, and they don't have it all the time. And what this allows us to do is prevent mistakes, because a lot of the problems organizations have is with administrators doing something by mistake because they've forgotten they have administrative privileges. So with privileged identity management, we can manage that more closely and make sure that users, administrators don't make those kinds of mistakes. So we have a full identity lifecycle. Another of the features of Office 365 is something called Endpoint Manager. So you may have heard of System Center Configuration Manager, and then you may have heard of Intune, which was the original cloud product. But what that's now been renamed, and we now have Endpoint Manager. So Endpoint Manager is the solution that allows you to manage all of your user devices. So whether it's Windows 10, whether it's Windows 8, whether it's Windows 7, whether it's Windows Mobile or Mac OS or iPhones or iPads or Android devices, we can use Endpoint Manager to manage those devices, all from one portal. So if you look at the Aramco cybersecurity requirements, you'll see that a lot of that is around managing your devices. And one of them in particular is making sure operating systems are up to date. Well, we can do that with Endpoint Manager. We can make sure operating systems are up to date. We can make sure that we apply patches as they're released by Microsoft, or as they're released by Apple, or as they're released by Google in terms of Android. Everything we can do through Endpoint Manager. What we can also do is control the configuration of those endpoints. So one of the key points within the Aramco cybersecurity requirements is making sure that passwords are not synchronized or stored within browsers. So by using Endpoint Manager, we can control browsers on devices and actually turn off password management, which stops the users then synchronizing those passwords within their browser. The issue here is that what a lot of users will do is use a personal account to synchronize passwords within their browser. So if they're using their browser for business, and they then access a business portal, they then can potentially save that username and password within their browser, and that password then gets synchronized using their own personal account to the internet, whether that's a Microsoft account or whether that's a Google account. And unfortunately, Microsoft accounts and Google accounts are the ones that get hacked the most. So if someone gains access to your employee's Google or Microsoft account, they then have access to all of their passwords. And this is specifically why Aramco is asking you to disable password synchronization within browsers. And we can do that within Endpoint Manager. So we can disable the password manager within the new version of Edge. We can do it within Chrome, and we can also do it within Firefox. And that's all within Endpoint Manager. Another set of the requirements that Aramco would like you to comply with is making sure that you have control over the applications on your devices. So with Endpoint Manager, we can manage those the applications on the devices. We can push applications to devices, and we can also uninstall applications from devices. We can also prevent services from running. So Endpoint Manager is your one-stop shop for managing all of your client devices. We also have within Endpoint Manager security baselines. So we can do things like enforcing passwords on devices. We can make sure that the screensaver is password protected and comes on after a certain amount of time. So the features you would usually have seen within Active Directory on premise, you can then get within Endpoint Manager. It really is a one-stop shop for managing all of your devices. And what happens if one of those devices is stolen, or what happens is if one of those devices is then needs to be wiped? We can do that within Endpoint Manager. So we can completely refresh a device, or we can wipe it, or we can retire it. There's nothing we can't do with Endpoint Manager. So Endpoint Manager is the solution to allow you to manage all of the devices in your business. Now we get on to some of the really clever parts of Office 365, where we're looking at information protection. So what we can do within Office 365, we can use something called data loss prevention. And what data loss prevention can do, amongst other things, is allow us to classify the information we have within Office 365. So we can define information as free for everyone to view. We can define it as company confidential, or maybe it's even more than that. It's secret company information. So we can have multiple different classifications of data within Office 365, and we can apply that to all of the data that we have within Office 365, whether that's within SharePoint, whether it's within OneDrive, or whether it's within our email within Exchange Online. So data loss prevention is one mechanism for categorizing and classifying all of the information we store. What we can do with that is then apply certain policies. So for example, within Exchange Online, you can define an email or define a policy on an email that prevents the recipient from forwarding that email. Another option is that we can apply a policy to a file such that we can restrict the audience of that file to people within the business. And what that means is that if someone decides to email that file to someone outside of the organization, those policies stick with the file. And so when that person, the third-party person outside your company, tries to open the file, they'll be restricted. They won't be able to open that file. So with data loss prevention, we have a way of protecting all of your information and making sure only the right people can gain access to it. We can apply classification automatically using machine learning. So we can look at all of the information you store and say and apply policies to it. So where Office 365 will check the contents and apply the right classification automatically, or we can allow users to apply the classifications themselves. We could also allow users to change those classifications if we wish, and also make sure that users provide some kind of justification if they do try and change the classification. So this is all done with certificates, meaning that when the files or the emails leave your organization, the same classifications apply. So it's all something you can use to classify data and protect your information at source. What this encryption also does, or what the certificates that are applied to your data allow you to do as well is encrypt the data. So any information that's stored within Microsoft 365 and Azure is encrypted by default at rest, it's encrypted in transit, and it's encrypted when it's in use. So there's no way for a user to get information and provide that to a third party. So if you remember the days when we had NTFS permissions, as soon as you moved a file from an NTFS protected drive to another one, all those NTFS permissions would disappear, and therefore that information will be unprotected. That's not the case with data loss prevention and the encryption that's implied. As soon as that encryption is implied, as soon as those classifications are provided, it stays with the information until such time as administrator or someone with the right permissions can remove those classifications. It really is a complete solution for protecting your information when it's in your business, on premise, and when it leaves your organization. So as I've mentioned, DLP enforces compliance with regulations and internal policies across cloud and on-premise. So wherever that information is stored, DLP policies are applied. Now you might be wondering about the licensing requirements for this. The licensing is only applicable to your organization. If, for example, someone applied a policy to a file that allowed external users access, then that external user wouldn't need a separate license to be able to open that information. The licenses only apply to your users. And as you can see, DLP, it's a consistently enforced DLP policies across endpoints, apps, and services. So whether that's Box, Salesforce, Teams, Exchange, SharePoint, anything you like, wherever that data is stored, your DLP policies are applied. And just to go into a bit more information, we can also identify hidden risk patterns with customizable machine learning templates requiring no endpoint agents. So as I've said, when a piece of information is secured or protected with DLP, is emailed outside your organization, those DLP policies still apply. And again, what this is allowing us to do is manage that complexity. We're managing the data at source, so when it gets transmitted, when it ends up in other locations, we've already applied the policies. But what this diagram is really showing us is how sophisticated our environments are becoming, and also what it's showing you is the different endpoints that can be attacked by hackers, for example. So we have all sorts of different areas that we need to try and deal with when we're trying to secure our information. And as you can see, even with this one diagram, things get quite complicated when we're talking about databases in different locations. We're trying to secure network traffic, documents that are either on-premise, they're in Office 365, or they've been emailed to a third party. We have multiple different endpoints, whether those are Windows devices, Mac devices, whether they are iPhones, they're Android, they're Windows Mobile. There's multiple different things we have to consider, and Office 365, Microsoft 365, and Azure allow us to manage all of this quite effectively. So if you recall the cybersecurity requirements that have come from Aramco, you'll see some of the specific requirements around protecting you against threats from email. So what we have within Office 365 is something called Defender. And Defender has multiple different features that allow us to protect our users against malicious emails. One, for example, is anti-phishing. So what Defender will do is check emails that users receive to see if potentially it's a phishing attack. So phishing is usually related to spoofing. So where someone is using your email address to send emails, even though that is not a legitimate source. So Office 365 can help you protect against your users being spoofed. And also Defender for 365 will check attachments that your users are being emailed. So very cleverly, what it will do is it can deliver an email without an attachment, check the attachment in the background, and then add the attachment later on once it's been scanned. And that's the safe attachments feature. The safe links feature is very clever as well. What will happen is that if a user is emailed a link by somebody, then the link within the email is changed to an internal link such that when the user clicks the link in the email, it goes to a sandbox, and the sandbox checks the link before it allows users access. So we truly are protecting users at every level. There's also a good anti-spam engine within Office 365, within Exchange Online, and also anti-malware. So all of those different features here are protecting your users against email vulnerabilities potentially. So we can protect your users against phishing, we can protect them against spam, we can protect them against malware, and also vulnerabilities in attachments and in links that they may be sent. One of the big areas at the moment that I'm dealing with in particular is email security. So what Exchange Online also supports is something called Dkim. And Dkim is an encryption technology that makes sure that emails that you send are validated as coming from you. Dkim is a very good way of making sure that emails sent by third parties are not validated and are not authenticated, such that when a recipient's email service receives them, they can be blocked. So when we're talking about, when you look in the Saudi Aramco cybersecurity requirements, and it talks about SPF, it talks about Dkim and also DMARC. This is where we're solving those problems. So Dkim comes along with SPF and also DMARC. Watad has resources that can help protect your emails. So where we talk about email deliverability, we can check your email to make sure that SPF records are correct. We can make sure that Dkim is applied, and we can also make sure that your DMARC policies are set such that emails from non-authenticated sources are rejected. We also have the ability to allow users to submit items that have been missed by the protections we're applying. And also we have enhanced filtering as well, just to make sure to give us that extra level of protection. So Defender for 365 does give you quite a broad scope of features that allow you to protect your users. And that is a feature that we can turn on within Office 365 to increase the protection for your users quite dramatically. So what we also have is opportunities within Office 365 to protect your users and also secure access to your third-party services. As you can see in this this slide here, we can use Microsoft Cloud App Security to protect your third-party services. So users would log in to Office 365 as usual, and then they can access all of the different services you provide them. So there are 16,000 or so supported applications, and you can see a small list here. But the idea is that we use Office 365 or Microsoft Cloud App Security to authenticate make sure authenticated users have access to the services that you are providing to them. Now we get into something which I'm going to go over quite quickly, but is really useful. What Office 365 does is give you a few different dashboards that allow you to check your security and compliance. So within Office 365, we have the Microsoft Secure Score. And what that does, that checks your environment against certain security compliance requirements to make sure that you are keeping up with the threats that are out there today. So Secure Score is very good, and it prompts you to protect your environment by potentially, say, turning off insecure protocols. It says it gives you a list of tasks to perform to increase your security. So it gives you a good score, and it gives you sort of a dashboard of things you can do to improve security for your users. And it's something I'm doing a lot with customers. So where a customer is not sure where to go to secure the environment, we go straight to the Microsoft Secure Store, and we can see which tasks we can perform to improve the security within their organization. And you can see some examples of what we have here. So blocking credential stealing, block executable content in emails, and so on and so on. And over time, with Secure Score, you can see how your security posture has changed, and you can track how you're doing. What we also have is the Compliance Center. So within Office 365, you can check your compliance against multiple different sets of requirements. So if you need to be GDPR compliant, there are checks within the Microsoft 365 Compliance Center to see how you are doing against GDPR compliance. And there are multiple different compliance policies that you can apply to your environment to see how you're doing. So multiple different compliance requirements from different countries. So GDPR is one, POPI in South Africa is another one that I'm familiar with. So there's multiple different policies you can check to see how you're doing against compliance against those different requirements. Another useful one is the Azure Security Center. So you can see how your environment is secured in different areas. So I'm conscious of time at the moment, and I want to get through to the question and answer section, so we have enough time. There are about 3 or 4 slides here that talk about Azure Sentinel, which is a feature within Microsoft Azure. And that what Azure Sentinel will do is give you an overall view of all of your different areas of security that you need to consider. So CM, Azure Sentinel is a CM, which is a security incident and event management solution. So all of your different security and security appliances can be integrated with Sentinel to give you an overall view of your security incidents within your organization. So one dashboard will give you a view of all of your security compliance and incidents within your organization. And again, we're just building on really showing you the different areas that Microsoft services can provide to you. It really is a full solution for all of your different security requirements. We can integrate multiple different ingress points, different types of appliances. They can all report to Azure Sentinel to give you a full overview of your security environment. Okay, so I've got to the end of the slides, and really what we're trying to do here is give you an understanding that Office 365 and Azure does give you lots of the solutions to the Aramco cybersecurity requirements. There really is a full suite of solutions for you, and we're confident we can use it to meet all the demands that Aramco is placing on you. So one thing I want to mention before we get to the discussion, what we can also provide you is a spreadsheet that we've put together that links the Saudi Aramco requirements to the technologies that I've been discussing today. So every single point within the cybersecurity requirements document that you have from Aramco is matched is mapped to a Microsoft technology to make it easier for you to understand what technology you need to use. So that's me done. I'm going to hand back to Fahad and Saud, and they can manage the discussion.
Mainly, it will be questions, Graham. I think we have one question for now from Saleh. How many endpoints can Endpoint Manager handle?
It can handle as many as you have. There's no restrictions. So what you would need to do is buy a license for every user, and every user can have a certain number of devices. But it's the licensing is per user, so we can manage all of the devices for a particular user once they have a license.
Very good, very good. We have another question from Khalid. Thanks very much for the information session. Please share the recording as well as the mentioned Excel sheet linking Aramco requirements to Microsoft solutions. Sure, Mr. Khalid. We'll be in contact with everyone here to share with them all the needed information regarding the CCC compliance and Aramco cybersecurity compliance. Do you have any other questions, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen? If you do so, please feel free to ask. Faisal Al-Khaldi, hello Faisal. Could Microsoft cover all the CCC compliance?
Yes, definitely. As I mentioned, we have a spreadsheet that we can email to you that I've been through every single point in the Saudi Aramco cybersecurity requirements list, and I've matched it to either a Microsoft technology within Microsoft 365 or Azure, or I've explained that a Watad technical resource can deal with it. So some of the requirements are strictly policy based. Like one of them is making sure your users don't write down passwords. Well, we haven't got a technology for that, but Watad can help you with compliance resources to help you get your policies in place to meet those requirements. So you do have policies and you have technologies. The spreadsheet will allow you to see which are policies, which are technologies, and in the case of technologies, which technology you can use.
Good. Jaweed, thanks for sharing information. You're very welcome, and you're most welcome, Mr. Jaweed. Approve. Saleh would like to speak. Yes, Mr. Saleh, you have the mic now. We have another question also from Muhammad Abbas. I've had a bad experience with similar providers, and main issue was delay, slowness, and high hardware requirements. Do we have the same issue here with Microsoft?
Not at all, really. No, the client for Endpoint Manager is actually already in Windows 10, but there's nothing we're installing on your devices to slow them down. And all of the services that we have they're cloud services. We're not running virtual machines to run those services. It's software as a service. It's a cloud service. So provided you have the licenses, there's enough power there to manage all of those requirements. So no, there really isn't any slowness as such, because that's all managed by Microsoft on their infrastructure. Do you have a specific example of slowness that you've experienced, and maybe we can have a look at that?
Great. Saleh, I think I've given you the mic access if you would like to speak. And one more thing regarding the CCC compliance, Microsoft does actually cover almost all the compliance, except of some services such as the penetration testing. We do have other consultants and engineers at Watad who does the penetration testing. Graham from Watad as well, he is responsible for the Microsoft Cloud solutions and products. Saleh, could you hear us? If you unmute your mic, I think you'll be able to speak to us. We have another question from Ali. For a small company, how much does it cost? And do you manage the baseline of the solution, or users have to take care of it? For the cost, that we could take it depending on what do you have and what is missing. We should do a gap analysis to figure out exactly where do you stand and what's the maturity for cybersecurity. And depending on that, we could tell you what else do you need and how much does it cost. And do you manage the baseline of the solution or users? Graham, could you take that?
Well, I can actually put a bit more detail to the cost. So, Ali, the cost is per user. Simple as that. So I have my own consultancy as well. So I also work freelance sometimes, and it's me. I have one computer, I have one license, but I have a whole enterprise environment to manage my one device. So all of the services are available to you per license, and the license, as I say, it's a per user license. It's not per device. It's not per mailbox, which some people get confused with. It's per user. We can provide you with the prices, but it depends on which license you require. There are different licenses at different tiers depending on what it is you need to achieve. As Fahad said there, it depends on what it is you need. But the licenses are per user. And we do manage the baseline of the solution. Yes, we can manage that. It's a software solution. It's a software as a service. It's in the cloud. So the service is there. As soon as you apply one license, you get all the services. So yes, we can manage the baseline for you. That's no problem. So because it's a cloud service, actually the number of users to manage this kind of solution is minimal. The good thing about something like Exchange Online, which is part of Office 365, is as soon as users start having mailboxes on an Exchange Online, or as soon as we migrate them to Office 365, the support requirements drop dramatically. Things just work. So we as a business don't have to manage servers. We don't have to manage hardware. We don't have to manage operating systems. All we have to do really is manage user accounts and mailboxes and aliases. Everything underneath is managed by Microsoft as the cloud provider. So the support requirements for managing an environment that's in the cloud, certainly in Microsoft 365 and Azure, is minimal. It drops the support requirements dramatically for you. So by moving to Office 365, by moving things to Azure, you'll find you have a much lower support cost. So I see you want. Okay, yes, you can talk, Ali.
Let me give you the access, Ali. I believe you have the access now, Mr. Ali.
Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, do you hear me?
Yep.
We can, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for this amazing workshop. I just have one question. Now in here in Saudi Arabia, we have somehow our national cybersecurity authority starting requesting from a good number of organizations to have their cloud service within the kingdom. Is there any plan for Microsoft to have a center here in Saudi Arabia?
I believe so. I think I read an article. I'm just trying to find. I think I did see an article saying that they're planning one. They're certainly starting to bring them into. Here we go. I think they might already be there. I'll have to check. I'll check the location of the data centers for you. But certainly there is a plan to bring a data center into Saudi for sure.
Regarding the cloud, there's no issue at all with Aramco because it's the NCA compliance, not the Aramco compliance, that bans the cloud services. But once you have cloud hosted in Saudi Arabia, it's even approved by the NCA. But for Aramco and CCC compliance, it's okay to have a cloud cybersecurity solutions.
Thank you so much.
Anyhow, Graham, could you please move to the next slide?
Yeah.
Everyone to see our email. If everyone here have any further questions or clarifications or queries, you could always reach out to me or to Graham from Watad and everyone else from Watad ICT as well. We will be very glad to help you and support you on your needs regarding the Microsoft solutions and other technologies as well to help fill the gaps of your cybersecurity maturity. And I think if no one else has more questions, I wouldn't like to take much of your time, gentlemen. And that will be it for today's webinar. We were very honored to have each and every one of you. Thank you so much for your attendance and looking forward to seeing you in future events. Thank you, Graham, as well, for your precious time and your amazing presentation.
You're welcome.
We hope you enjoyed and benefited our webinar, everyone. Thank you and have a great day.